Hi, my name is Nick Miller. My wife and I have attended WCC since about 2011. Both serve in the church. We got into, I would say, probably the first 5 or 6 years, we were just regular Sunday morning attendees, just kind of came to church on Sunday and went home and came back the next Sunday. I grew up in a very religious home. I had a religious upbringing. I went to a private Christian school. But through my teenage years, I made some wrong turns, and I got involved with some things I shouldn't have. And all throughout my 20s, I got involved in drugs. I am a recovering addict. I was facing multiple charges. I've been to the penitentiary 3 different times, and this last time I was facing a mandatory minimum sentence, and I was looking at 25 years in the Indiana Department of Corrections. But instead, through the intervention of God, I was sentenced to a sobriety house here in Warsaw. So I spent 22 months at the Serenity House in recovery. To be honest with you, I really didn't know much about the Benevolence Committee. I knew there was a community care fund. I knew there was a large care fund taken up or offering at the end of the year for the care fund. But I was approached about becoming a member of the Benevolence Committee. And once I found out a little more information about it, I thought, what a unique way to help others with just basic needs here in the community. So I work at a local auto repair shop. And a year ago, we decided to partner with WCC to create a car care clinic for the River Moms, which is a single moms ministry from WCC. Things are, expensive these days, and automotive repairs are very expensive. To be able to help them with a brake job or, get those bald tires off the vehicle and get some safe tires on there as they're transporting their kids to and from school or to and from church, just to be able to help them out with those basic needs with their vehicle. It just opens the door, to share the love of Jesus, and we're called to love our neighbors and to help others. So the really exciting thing as far as being part of the community care team is to see the transformation that happens when we're able to provide this kind of help in our community. And on the flip side of that, the transformation that happens to us personally or with me is just amazing. Being able to help these people financially or to help them with tangible needs is just a real blessing. We need that care fund, I guess, to be available to help these people in our community.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Andrea Payton. I'm on staff here at WCC, and I am the leader of the Benevolence Ministry. I love Nick's video, and I so much appreciate his willingness to share his story with us this morning. That video is a testimony to the transformation that can happen when a person accepts and surrenders to the generosity and grace of God. And what I really appreciate about Nick's story especially is that he has used that generosity and through the Holy Spirit has blessed others in our community with the work that he does here at the church and in the community. Today we are kicking off our 2024 Special Year-End Care Fund campaign. This is an opportunity for everybody in the WCC church family to give above and beyond their normal annual giving. We've been doing this campaign since 2006, and we have raised over $4.3 million since then. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And we've been able to do so much with that money in our community and abroad. Just this year, we have been able to do a lot. We've helped to fund the closure and setup of the gathering place, a fellowship mission gathering place in downtown Warsaw. It's an awesome place where the community gathers and we can support each other. We've also helped fund the build of over 24 beds by funding our partner Sleep in Heavenly Peace. Those beds go to children in our community. We've also given donations to help the disaster relief fund of everything that's happened in the world in 2024. And the thing that's nearest and dearest to my heart is we've been able to help so many individuals and families through the community care and benevolence ministries. This year, the money that we earn or get through the 2024 Special Year-End Care Fund campaign will be allocated to 2 buckets. The first bucket is crisis and hardship. The second bucket is missions and disaster relief. And you can give to this fund many ways. You can give in person through cash and checks. You can give online through the WCC app, and you can also give through stock donations. So today we have 10 white balloons on our stage. And yeah, I think all of you kind of know what's coming next. Last Sunday was Salvation Sunday, and 10 of our children in our Sunlight ministry said yes to accepting Jesus as their forever friend, and that's awesome. So much going on in WCC this month. We're going to be kicking off our Advent series next Sunday. You can find out more about that as well as everything else by picking up a what's going on flyer in the back of the auditorium or using the QR codes on the seats here in the auditorium. Thank you, and please rise as we continue our worship.
What is an idol in our lives today? It's not just ancient statues or golden calves. Idols are the distractions that pull us away from God. Romans 1:25 says, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator." These counterfeit gods promise satisfaction but leave us empty. They pull us further from the one who can truly fill our hearts. Join us as we explore the truth behind what we idolize and discover what really deserves our worship.
Good morning. I hope you all had a very good Thanksgiving. Well, today we're going to wrap up our series titled Counterfeit. And what we're going to do is kind of give you some hands-on kind of practices that can help you at least identify what the idols are in your life. You know, we've been talking about this idea of idolatry, which seems a little weird to us in our culture today because you don't see a lot of people erecting statues, golden calves, things like we saw a lot in the Old Testament and in the ancient world and even some places in the world today. But idols are much sneakier than that. And I've always said the enemy of our souls, if he were only like that little character that we portray him as during Halloween, it'd be much easier to recognize him. But he is an author of deception. He's the second most powerful being in the universe. And I think if he can take our allegiance and our eyes off of God, then he has won quite a victory in our lives. 3 weeks ago, we started by talking about happiness. And, you know, I posed the question that if you got everything your heart desired, would you be happy? And I came to the conclusion that I think it could be one of the worst things that could ever happen to us because it exposes the need for something or someone much bigger, much deeper. And then the next week, I talked about human relationships and how important they are, but when they take priority over God, you know, and we used the term, and Todd even used it last week, when a good thing becomes a God thing, it can be a bad thing, or it is a bad thing. That, you know, sometimes we can put, whether it's our spouses or our children or our parents or our friends, above God, then that is a problem. And then last week, Todd talked about success, which is probably an easier one to deal with because so much of our identity is wrapped up in our successes, whether it's vocationally, financially, athletically, relationally, whatever you want to call it. And you know that's been something that has been a lifelong battle for me, you know. And so I speak to you today as a fellow traveler on this journey of keeping God first in our lives. I think I'm farther along than I was yesterday and last year and 10 years ago, but I'm still a work in progress, and I'd like to think it's progress. But today, I want to kind of ask the question, what do we do about this? Because it's so pervasive. Martin Luther, the reformer, once said that if you look at the 10 commandments, the reason the first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me is this. If every other commandment that we would break requires us to break that one first. Almost all the other ones are dependent upon whether or not we are putting other gods before the one true God. And I think once we do that, then we're susceptible to all these other things in our lives. And so what I want us to do is to look at what is the solution? What is the answer to idolatry? Again, it's an ongoing process, but the answer really is we need to replace our idols with God. And I'm not talking about a general belief in God, but I'm talking about a divine encounter with God, an encounter with the living God, one that is transformational, one that changes our hearts, our minds, our souls, where it renews our thinking, where it allows us to see God's best and God's will, like Paul talks about in Romans 12, as we present ourselves to him. And what we're going to do as we look at this is we're going to look at a guy that I was talking about 2 weeks ago, Jacob, and we're going to look at how his life changed when he encountered God. And but I want to give you a little bit of a background on this scenario if you weren't here the last couple weeks again, or even if you were, just to refresh our memories. If you think back 3 weeks ago, I started this series by talking about Abraham and Sarah. And when Abraham and Sarah had waited until Abraham was 100, Sarah was 90 to have a child named Isaac, God had promised that he would make a great nation through the descendants of Abraham. And Abraham's like, well, that would require me to have descendants. And so he waited a long time. And you can understand how they had waited for so many years, 25 years, I think, from the promise until the delivery of that promise in Isaac, how you could value that child. We know how much we value our children already, but can you imagine in that scenario? And then to have God turn around and ask you to be willing to sacrifice your child, which seems barbaric and crazy to us in our world today, but it was not as crazy back then. And we know that God spared Isaac, and he knew that Abraham was all in on this mission, this journey. And then the next weekend, I talked about Isaac and what happened with Isaac. And Isaac and Rebekah had twins, Esau and Jacob. And what was customary was that the oldest child, the oldest son, would receive the blessing. And yet God told Isaac, he said, I want you, the second will rule over the first. He was saying, I want the second of the twins born, Jacob, to receive your blessing. But Isaac refused to give that to him. So what happened later in his life is Jacob dressed up like Isaac when his father was, they said his sight was poor, went in and tricked his father into giving him the blessing that Esau thought was going to be his. And so basically what you have then at this point, the deception of Jacob, and you have Esau, who was a hunter and an outdoorsman, and Jacob was a little bit of a mama's boy, and so Esau determines that he's going to kill his brother. He's going to kill his brother Jacob for stealing his birthright. So what happens is Jacob then leaves the country and he goes to the homeland of his mother. And there he hooks up with connects with his uncle Laban, who was a successful businessman. And Jacob had a reputation for being the same. And so he came up with an employment contract, which would say, I will work for you for 7 years in exchange for your youngest daughter, Rachel, who was the beautiful one who he became obsessed with, smitten with. And instead of Leah, who was the oldest, who by nature, who should have received that first. Now, this was a bad time for women to be alive when you could be basically traded for labor, but it was the world that they lived in back then. So we know what happened. I talked about that, his obsession with her. He worked for 7 years, and then Laban ends up tricking him by, he was probably drunk and tired, and it was dark on his wedding night, and he ends up sleeping with Leah, who was masqueraded as Rachel, and he was bitter about that, but he was so obsessed with Rachel, I'm getting to the point here, so obsessed with Rachel that he was willing to work another 7 years for her. Talk about dysfunction upon dysfunction upon dysfunction, and his choices were horrible. And now here's the question that is begged, and I talked about this, and I ran into another Jacob last week after church, and he said, I had the same question for my parents. Why didn't you name me Esau? Why did you name me Jacob? Because Esau seemed to be the better of the two brothers. But the cool part of this story is it really is a story of redemption. It is really the gospel in full display. Jacob did absolutely nothing to earn God's favor and God's blessing. In fact, he did exactly the opposite. And yet God chose to rename him Israel and do great things through him. And that's where I want to pick up the story today. But it wasn't until he had an encounter with the living God, a divine encounter, that everything really changed for him. And what is true for him is true for us today. So let's look at the story of, I'll call it the prodigal brother in Genesis chapter 31, verses 1 through 3, where we pick this story up today. But Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. Jacob had robbed our father of everything, they said. He has gained all his wealth at our father's expense, and Jacob began to notice a change in Laban's attitude toward him. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. Now, I'm going to try to put myself in Jacob's shoes right here and think this does not come across to him as very good news, because he knows what is waiting for him back in his homeland. He knows who is waiting for him, his brother Esau, who wants to kill him. But if you fast forward to the encounter with Esau, you begin to see something quite supernatural happen that ends up changing Jacob's life forever. And so if you jump down to Genesis chapter 32, verses 1 through 6, this is where we read the encounters about to take place. As Jacob started on his way again, angels of God came to meet him. When Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, this is God's camp. So he named the place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir, in the land of Edom. He told them, give this message to your master Esau, or to my master Esau. So he's already humbling himself. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Until now I have been living with Uncle Laban, and now I own cattle, donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I have sent these messengers to inform my Lord of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me. Now, I don't know what his motivation is here, but he's doing a lot of sucking up to his brother because he knows his brother, at least the last time they had contact, was not very happy with him. After delivering the message, the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, we met your brother Esau, and he is already on his way to meet you with an army of 400 men. And I'm sure that Jacob is like, well, I knew this day was coming, and so let's just get it over with. Now, if you think about it, and I want to give you a little snapshot of the mess that Jacob made of his life because he kept putting others before God, it would look something like this. Jacob's life had been one long wrestling match to get the blessing that he had wrestled with Esau to hear from his father's lips. He had wrestled with Laban. Todd talked about how he was wrestling with God even last week. He said he had wrestled with Laban to find it in Rachel's face, but it hadn't worked. He was still needy and empty inside. The relationships within his own family were stormy. His idolatry of Rachel and her children had poisoned the lives of Leah and her children, and it would bear bitter fruit in the future. And now Esau was on his way. The man who had kept him from his father's love, from his inheritance, from his destiny, from happiness. He was coming with an army. Tomorrow would be Jacob's last battle. Or so he thought. You know, if you think about this, it is such an interesting thing. Jacob might have been saying to himself, as Tim Keller puts it about this time, what an idiot I've been. Here's what I've been looking for my whole life. The blessing of God. I looked for it in the approval of my father. I looked for it in the beauty of Rachel, but it was in you. Now I won't let you go until you bless me. Nothing else matters. I don't care if I die in the process, because if I don't have God's blessing, I have nothing. You see, this is where it's so interesting, and I used this quote a couple of weeks ago, and I really looked for the reference for this quote, but this is where he was right now, and I want to go ahead and put this up on the screen for you right now. You don't realize God is all you need until God is all you have. Now, that quote's been attributed to a number of people, so take it for what it is, but that is so true, and for so many of us, oftentimes we don't realize that God is all we need until we are forced into the situation of God is all we have. I know some of my greatest times of darkness and disappointment have led to some of the greatest seasons of spiritual growth for me, because I realize, I'm reminded during those times of how easy it is to slip into this idolatrous idea that this or that is going to make me happy. This or that is going to give me security, whether it's my bank account, whether it's a relationship, whatever it is. But it's not until those things are threatened, or I find myself in a dark place where those things don't matter, where I'm crying out to God, that I realize this is all I needed all along. I wish I would have known that before I did this and this and this and this. So Jacob is finally coming to see this, and realizing what he has been looking for, his entire life. And I think so many of us get to this point in our lives where until that happens, we don't really get it. And so an unexpected thing happens to him. He has an encounter with the living God as we continue on and look at chapter 32, verses 24 through 28. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip, wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. And I believe this is a metaphor, really, and I think a real situation where he is holding on to God for dear life, and God is allowing him to do that. It's not like God can't really get out of the hold. I mean, he actually damaged his hip just to get him off. But what we read here is he is holding on to God for his life. And when in that moment, something happened to him when he realized that's what he needed. "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on, you'll be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men, and you have won." He finally gets it. He finally understands what he'd been looking for his entire life. It was God. And yet he had wrecked so many relationships and done so much damage because he thought, if I have Rachel, I'll be happy. If I have this, I'll be happy. And how many of us can relate to this? But what really happens here changes everything. And this is where God has to take all of us, I think, sometimes in order to really use us the way he wants to use us. He has to break us. And we have to understand that we can only hold on to him for dear life if we want security, if we want safety, if we want significance, if we want happiness. It comes from him and him alone. And then the other things begin to make sense because we keep them in their proper place. Verses 1 through 4 in Genesis 33. Then Jacob looked up after wrestling with God. He looks up and he sees Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and his 2 servant wives. He put the servant wives and their children at the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. And you think, well, he's using them as a human shield. No, he's not at all. He's actually saying, you can have this. You can have all of these things. But then what he does is really cool. Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed down to the ground 7 times before him. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. And this story reminds me so much of the prodigal son. When he returns home, his father runs out to greet him and kisses him and welcomes him home, just like his brother does. This is just another story of God's redeeming grace and love for us, even though we don't deserve it. And the beauty of this story is in Jacob's life, God became weak so that Jacob could be strong in him. And doesn't he do really the same thing for all of us? You know, you look at the weakness of God. Why would God do such a thing? Because it's what God does. And I've talked about this. If I were to make up a religion, this wouldn't be what I would do. I wouldn't come up with a weak God. But what he's showing us is a different kind of strength and a different kind of security. I mean, the answer to the question is, why would God be weak? It comes later in the Bible when the Lord again appeared as a man. But in the darkness with Jacob, think about this. God feigned weakness in order to save Jacob's life. But in the darkness of Calvary, the Lord appeared as a man and became truly weak in order to save us. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul talks about this. He said, "But Christ has rescued us from the curse pronounced by the law. When he was hung on the cross, he took upon himself the curse for our wrongdoing. For it is written in the scriptures, 'Cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree.' Through Jesus Christ, God has blessed the Gentiles with the same blessing he promised to Abraham, so that we who are believers might receive the promised Holy Spirit through faith." And what we see in the Old Testament here, and what we're going to look at throughout the Advent season, is we're going to see the gospel played out in the life of even Jacob. How God knew what Jacob needed, and it's what we needed. So what I want to kind of land this series with is I want us to look at how important it is for us to recognize the idols in our own lives. And I want to give you 4 things to look at, because I think that if we don't recognize these things, they'll slip in and slide in without us even realizing it, because they are very subtle and they're very sneaky. And the enemy of our souls is the second most powerful being in the universe, and he is good at what he does, and he knows where we struggle. He knows where we are most vulnerable to idolatry. So basically what I want to do is give you 4 suggestions to kind of take away, with you today. And what I want us to remember is this. The key verse that I started this series out with is in Romans chapter 1, verse 25, where Paul says, they traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. The things that God creates are for our good, whether it's success or happiness or human relationships. Those are good things. But remember again, when a good thing becomes a God thing, it's a bad thing. And God is more than happy to bless us with those things as long as we keep our relationship with him in the proper order of priority, which is always first. And so how can we recognize when we have an idol or idols in our lives? Well, I want us to look at 4 things. The first thing I want us to look at is look at your thought life. What consumes your thoughts? What do you think about a lot? This is really a big deal. Archbishop William Temple once said, the true God of your heart is what your thoughts effortlessly go to when there's nothing else demanding your attention. What do you enjoy daydreaming about? What occupies your mind when you have nothing else to think about? Do you develop potential scenarios about career advancement or material goods such as a dream home or a relationship with a particular person? 1 or 2 daydreams are no indication of idolatry. Ask rather, what do you habitually think about to get joy and comfort in the privacy of your heart? I mean, think about that. This is so, you guys, I get this. One of the practices that I began probably 15 or 20 years ago was this practice of the first thing in the morning when I'm having my quiet time to sit still before God, to just allow him to speak, first of all, because he's got all the answers and I don't, but to also help me examine my thought life. What am I thinking about? What are my thoughts about? What do I think about a lot? What do I obsess about a lot? What is important to me? Because like you, I struggle with idolatry. I struggle with putting things way too high of an order of importance in my life. I mean, some of you probably think I sound a little stuffy today because I have a cold. It was because of all the weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth during the Ohio State-Michigan game yesterday. I'm kidding about that. But those things become such a big thing for all of us, and I'm guilty. I was with my grandchildren and my children over at least 2 of them, and their families over the holiday weekend, and I can see where we can put those relationships even above God sometimes, above importance to God, and so I think we just got to be very, very careful, but listen to your thoughts. They can tell you a lot about your priorities. Second thing is look at how you spend your money or save your money. Now, Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, I'm talking about people who spend their money extravagantly and foolishly and frivolously. Yes, but it's also if we save for unhealthy reasons. I think sometimes God is speaking to misers as well. It's like, I'm really good with my money. I've gone through all the Dave Ramsey stuff and all that. It's all good stuff. I believe that, and we see that as noble. It is, unless we are looking for that to bring us ultimate security. So if we expect spending too much to make us happy, or spending too little to make us secure, I think we've got to go, what is our relationship with our money? I think that's critical. Examine that, because that can help you, if you really are honest with your thought life, with how you spend or use your money, or what your relationship with your money is like, it can tell you an awful lot about what's important in your life. A third thing that I would encourage you to look at, which is going to sound a little counterintuitive as well, is look at your prayer life. What do you pray for? Is it for you, for yours? I mean, that's normal. I pray for my family every day. I pray for the church every day. Those are good things. But how do I respond when God doesn't answer my prayers the way I would like him to? Do I trust him enough to think maybe he's telling me no or wait? Because sometimes in those moments of waiting, again, is where I have grown the most. It's like, I wanted this answer, God, you didn't give it to me. And this also, I think because of a lot of our flimsy theologies floating around, can be very discouraging and defeating for us. It's like, well, apparently you didn't have enough faith, or there's sin in your life, and that's why God didn't answer your prayer. Maybe God is trying to teach you something by saying no or not yet. Do you trust him enough to allow him to do that in your life? I don't like that any more than you do, but I remember reading a book a long time ago, the first book I read by Philip Yancey called Disappointment with God, and he said in this book, we are going to be disappointed in life, and so we can choose to be disappointed with God or without God. I choose to be disappointed in life with God because ultimately, I believe all things work together for our good. Maybe not even this side of the grave, but that side. And then the fourth thing I would ask you to kind of take a look at is look at your emotions. You know, what are the overwhelming emotions? Let's say you struggle with anger. Why? That might lead you to what an idol is. Maybe you struggle with worry. I've admitted that. Why? Maybe that will lead you. If you listen to that emotion, maybe it will lead you to that idol in your life. What do you struggle with? What are the emotions that are most intense? What riles you up the most? Maybe you're placing too much importance on those things, whether it's your team winning or losing, whether it's politics, whether it's a relationship. What are the emotions that dominate your life? That's probably pointing you to what is more important than God. I want to just kind of, as I have Jason come up and going to lead us in a last song, to really think about, the thing that I've been talking about today and the things that Todd and I have been talking about the last few weeks. But while he's making his way up here, I'm going to read you a quote from a Christian psychologist who passed away several years ago. His name is David Powlison. And he writes a really interesting thing about idolatry, and I think it's a great way to close this series. He said that most basic question which God poses to each human heart: has something or someone besides Jesus Christ taken title to your heart's functional trust, preoccupation, loyalty, service, fear, and delight? Questions bring some of people's idol systems to the surface. To whom or what do you look for life-sustaining stability, security, and acceptance? What do you really want and expect out of life? What would really make you happy? What would make you an acceptable person? Where do you look for power and success? These questions, or similar ones, tease out whether we serve God or idols, whether we look for salvation from Christ or from false saviors. I know we've given you some things to think about over the last few weeks, and I just want to challenge you to continue to place yourself before God, to be still, to know him, to hear from him, to tell you what is it that's hindering your relationship with him. It could be something very good. But remember, when a good thing becomes a God thing, it's a bad thing. So what could be a greater prayer or a greater request to God than for Christ to be magnified in our lives? I want to give you a little cheery exercise to take with you today. I want you to think about, what do you want people to say about you at the end of your life, at your funeral? How would you like to be remembered? As someone who magnified Christ. It's pretty unlikely that people are going to talk about what an attractive person you were, or how much money you made, or how successful you were. They may mention those things, but what they're going to mention, and trust me, I've been to a lot of funerals, I've done a lot of funerals, hundreds and hundreds of them, and it's always about, he loved Jesus. She was an amazing grandmother or mother. What a great friend. What a servant. What an unselfish person. And I think that if our reason for getting up in the morning is to magnify and glorify God, I think we'll live with a life mostly ordered properly. Magnify God. As you walk out of these doors today, you enter into your mission field in a world that desperately needs the gospel. How will you magnify God in your speech, in your actions, in the way you do your work, in the way you parent, the way you live out your marriage? How will God be glorified in that? Just ask yourself that question. And I think if you do, I think you'll live a life that is honoring to God. And then when you get to the end, you can stand before God as he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Well, with that in mind, go into the world. Thank you for coming today and hope to see you back next week. Blessings.